Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. Our mission is to see a world well led. And our strategy to get there? To empower leaders like you to lead every day. So let's get to work.
Welcome to the Lead Every Day show. I'm Randy Gravitt.
And I'm Mark Miller.
And Marco, we are talking about something that we love today. We're talking about teams a little bit. This is going to be fun. And I've got a question for anybody listening out there. How skilled is your team? How good? I mean, if you want to think about how good is your team? Are they really good? I think a lot of times we think, our team's pretty good. They're really good. But not necessarily how competent is your team. I'm assuming everybody that you've hired or put in a position, they were competent for their job. But how skilled is your team? I kind of used the word there a second ago. What are you doing to really upskill your team? And Mark, I think it could be low-hanging fruit here for some of the people listening to think about, let's upskill every single position on our payroll. This could be transformational, honestly, for some organizations that might be listening today.
Yeah, and there is certainly an upskilling angle, and I think everything we're going to say will help speak to that. But sometimes there are gaps, and I think you just got to be willing to confront the truth. You know, you may have a player with a gap, multiple players that just can't do what they need to do, or you may have a gap as you think about the entire team. And so whether you're closing a gap or just making a good team better, I still think we've got some ideas that'll help today.
Yeah, I love the call out that there are really two kinds of skills. There are individual skills and there are team skills, and the gap could lie in either one of those. So I think that's really great. Let's jump in here today and talk a little bit about these team skills. This will be fun.
Yeah, and so let me say something that I don't know. You and I have never even really talked about this, but I was talking to a senior leader, the point leader of a very large organization recently. He's come in and he's inherited a team, and he feels like there's some things missing. And so we had a fascinating conversation. I'll give you the really, really short version of it. He wasn't sure that the people around the table could fill all the needs. Even if you upskill them. I mean, there were some fundamental skill sets. And now what he really had determined is that he had some missing players, right? So stay with me, how this connects here. And he realized that he probably needed 3 or 4 different skill sets, not upskilling a salesperson to make them a better salesperson or whatever. He needed some different skill sets. And then he said, but I'm really trying to figure out which of these missing players, once we kind of landed on that spot, he said, from a strategic standpoint, which one do I need to fill first? So I know this is a little off point, but I think it speaks to something that I believe will help us as we move through this conversation. I asked him, what were his strengths and which of those empty skill slots could he best fill? So don't assume as the leader that you don't have a role to play, particularly when there's a gap. Well, this guy, I think, knew intuitively and from a track record of success that there were a couple of those spots that he could fill. I said, well, then maybe you don't fill those first, because you're going to be in those meetings. You're going to be part of that team. And so don't ignore how you can help upskill a group by bringing your expertise to the table.
Yeah, that's good. I know you and I both are sports guys. We enjoy watching games, and they're a lot of fun. And a few weeks ago, Mark, I don't know if you saw any of the NFL draft or not. I watched a little bit of the first round of the NFL draft, and it was interesting. At the bottom of the screen, every time a team would come up and it was their time to draft, it would say biggest needs at the bottom. You know, they may need a tackle, or they need a cornerback, or they got to have a safety, or they may need a quarterback. I mean, the teams that need quarterbacks were picking pretty quick. I mean, they were the first ones to pick, because if you don't have a quarterback, you've got a problem on your hands. Well, in business, there's not really a draft. We don't get to, it'd be great if there was an NFL draft. Right now, it's kind of the off season, right? The Super Bowl was a few months ago. The season doesn't start until September. And they basically have 5-6 months to rebuild their team, rebuild their roster. That's not the way business works per se. But I think there are some things that we can do to think about, upskilling our, with what we do have, identifying some of our gaps. And Mark, you've worked on teams this is probably a nice way of saying you're old. I'm old too, but you've been doing this for decades, Mark. You've been working on teams. You've been studying teams. We've worked on teams together for a long time. And there's some things that really work and things that probably don't. Well, in the absence of free agency probably is available to you if you're building a team, whether you're a football coach or not. But there is no draft. In the absence of those things, what do you do if you have gaps on your team? I mean, if you realize some of these gaps you're talking about are there,
yeah.
What do we do? We're real big on helping our people that listen here practice. So where do we go?
Well, not unlike the example you just shared, it was obvious, at least to those observers, what those teams needed, whether it was a position player or a quarterback or whatever. I think for leaders, they need to evaluate the skill set of their team. And as we've already referenced, at two levels, think about individuals and then think about the team as a whole, because the strategy for moving forward would be different in some ways if you're trying to help an individual do something versus helping the entire team. So I would say you need to focus on your greatest need. I think that may sound really obvious, but I've talked to a lot of leaders that have multiple needs. And just like the story I referenced a moment ago, this guy was trying to figure out what's the most strategic hire. Well, after you think about what you can contribute, I would say focus on something. So speaking of which, as we go through this conversation, let's talk about for an individual. We'll come back to the team in a minute. When you're trying to help a leader, my assumption is you've got some skill set in mind or some competency level in mind, and you're able then to assess the individuals on your team against that aspiration. And if you decide that Joe needs to be better at listening, well, a problem well defined is half solved, because you got all kind of strategies and tactics you can use to help Joe become a better listener. But until you focus, you can't productively move forward if you say, I've identified 6 things that would make Joe better. Well, you could probably identify 50 things that would make me better, but you need to focus. I think that'd be step one.
Yeah, and I like the idea of in the individual here, like you're saying, almost we're creating an individual development plan kind of mindset, and that focus would be really number one on the plan. That's huge. I mean, and in fact, everybody listening, you could create a plan for everybody on your payroll that would help them all improve and upskill everybody. It's not just your low performers. Every single person gets better. What you're doing is going to get better. So we could focus. I love that. And I also like the idea of customizing it. And you kind of started down that road, but if Joe has, Joe needs this and Jenny needs that, then let's make sure that we customize those plans for that individual, especially with an individual kind of mindset.
Yeah, but let's take that a step further, because certainly we're going to customize it based on their need, but let's pretend Joe and Susanna need the same thing from a skill set or a competency. Well, you may know that Joe is so relational that you need to probably get him with a buddy or a coach or a mentor. And you may know that Susanna, she really is going to thrive if you can give her something she can read and something she can study. So you're going to find a book. And you see, you can take this all the way down to the individual learning style preferences of the individuals, and that'll give them the greatest chance of success.
I love that. And Joe may have a certain amount of time in this season, and Susanna may not, and vice versa. So I love the idea of being able to customize that. Let's talk specifics here, Mark. I think, and if we're going to have a good plan to help Joe and Susanna grow, we want to be specific. And I would say to customize and that thing in a very specific tactics and strategies for each one to help them in these places. So you got some thoughts on that? I'm sure you'll have some ideas here.
Well, yeah. Uh, Specific, I mean, you can be specific at multiple levels. So you may have a team member, call him John, and you say, John, you need to be a better communicator. Well, okay. I mean, most all of us could stand to be better communicators, but what is it you really want? Let's be specific. Is the problem written communications? Is the problem communications relationally, that you're not listening, you're not paying attention, you're dominating conversations, and so that's communication? Is it that you make awful PowerPoint slides and you undermine your messaging? Is it that you're not a good communicator, or that you're long-winded, or whatever? So you may put communication as the broad overarching need for somebody on your team, but say, hey, we're going to help you build better PowerPoint slides, or we're going to help you in interpersonal communications. Let's work on that together. And so again, this may feel very obvious, but I've seen too many development plans throughout my career that are broad brush. I want to get better at XYZ. And you just wonder, what in the world would I work on if somebody gave me a mandate like that? And would I be aligned with the felt need that led to the conversation? And so just as specific as possible gives everybody a better chance to win.
Yeah. I like the idea of giving them the mandate, calling it out, but I also would say if it's going to be a really good individual development plan, we need to write it down. And there's so much power in making sure that we are very clear with what what the expectations are, that we write that out. And somebody can come back. It's a living, breathing document. I say living, breathing because it is going to be organic. We're not necessarily, these are not slice and bake cookies here. It may change over time as we make progress, or maybe we're not making progress and we have to have a different tactic or a different strategy on some things because we still need that skill. And so, but I think there's so much, we see this all the time. When people have written development plans, they're just much more likely to make progress.
Yeah. And my life coach told me several years ago, probably a decade ago, he said, there's only one thing that happens when you write your plan down. You accomplish more of it.
Yeah.
That in and of itself is enough reason to write it down.
Yeah. There's no question. That's great. Okay. So when we write this plan down, Mark, let's don't lose the idea of naming the win. I think sometimes we write this plan, Joe, I want you to get better in all these areas, and then Joe's out there trying to get better, but we haven't really told Joe what it looks like if he win. What does winning look like here in this development, this personal development we're talking about here today? I think there's so much. It's almost like a gift. There's so much power when we tell somebody, this would be winning. This is what it would look like. You'd be able to lead the monthly meeting, or you'd be able to, your emails would be, you can define this however you want to, but if we're not careful, we will write it down and not name the win. And then Joe's still wondering, am I making progress? And we don't think he is, but we're not really telling him. We're kind of giving him time. And it just gets real murky. And not a lot of great stuff happens when we leave stuff to chance.
Yeah, and you can see the linkage here. It's much easier to review your progress if you've actually written something down.
Yeah, say more about that, Mark, because I think the last thing I would say in an individual development plan would be the idea of monitoring progress. So talk more about that.
Yeah, how are you doing? And I agree with this idea of defining the win, but they're going to be process metrics and outcome metrics. And so there may be activities that you pursue as you're striving for the outcome. And so as you monitor your progress, if I'm trying to become a better communicator, we already said that's pretty broad, but let's say I'm trying to create better PowerPoint slides. And so part of the plan is that you're going to meet with this other person on our team at least once a month for the next 3 months and spend a couple of hours getting them to coach you on building better PowerPoint slides. You're going to read Nancy Duarte's book, Slideology. I'm making some stuff up here, but you go 30, 60, 90 days in, you can look at that plan and say, are we making progress? Well, it's hard to really say because we don't have outcomes, but you can say, well, I'm taking the necessary steps. And so I am therefore making progress. And then there's still the win that you've identified. And let's pretend that the last time you made a presentation to a group, they rated you a 2.0 on your slides. And your goal is to get to a 4.0. Well, in 90 days, you're going to do another presentation. And one of the questions on the evaluation is, how helpful were these slides? And we're going to find out that's an outcome metric. That's not, I read a book or I met with another employee. So writing it down, naming your win, all of that leads to evaluating your progress and ultimately to getting some real traction on whatever you're trying to upskill.
Yeah, that's great. That's great stuff, Mark. Okay, so we've taken a little time. We've talked about that if the individual has gaps, how to upskill them, this individual development plan. Let's take the rest of our time today and talk about what happens if your team has some gaps, because sometimes it's not an individual on our team. Sometimes it's just we're not who we need to be as a team, and we have some gaps there. And I would say let's start back where you started with that first list. I think focus is I think it's the place to start, because let's say I have a team. I may have a team that's got 4 or 5 different gaps that we could attack. I believe it's really important for us to rank order those and start with our most critical gap first.
Yes.
Let's focus on that. That to me would be the starting place here if I have a team gap.
Yes, but let's go to the let me try and what am I looking for? The precursor to focus is, what are the skills that you want your team to possess as a team?
Yeah.
And I would say for the leader, that's a really good exercise for you to say, okay, what are the half dozen skills that I want the team to have? So let me give you some examples, Randy. You may want to pile on here. How do we do goal setting as a team? How do we do problem solving as a team? How do we do conflict resolution as a team? See, these are examples of team skills. And you could make a longer list.
How do we lead? How do we meeting management? We would put that in there for sure on that list. There would be others for sure.
Yeah. So make your list. Then you can assess the team against that list and go, well, it's pretty obvious that we need to work on our meetings because they're not productive.
They're awful.
They're awful. Would not be a shocker. But you can work on that and you can fix it. So start with what, not unlike the individual, you're trying to figure out what opportunities or gaps exist with the individual. Look at the same for the team. You may decide there's several, but as Randy just said, focus, pick something that you can attack, make progress, and then that list is still there. You can always go back to it. Yeah, focus is always a really good place.
Training, and we'll have a group of people at a round table, and they'll all have their water bottle or whatever. Let's say everybody's got a container on the table, and I'll say, look for the container on the table, and there may be 8 of them. But if there's somebody's got a pink water bottle, and I say, look for the pink water bottle, I mean, all eyes go to the pink water bottle. And I think just naming, like, this is our pink water bottle, this is our opportunity to improve first, that the level of focus just goes crazy when the leader calls it out. So I love that. I think that's so powerful. This idea of a team, we'll call it a team development plan. It starts with focus. It's really good. All right. What would you say? Where do you want to go next?
Well, I'll mention something at the strategic level, then we can give some specific examples. You've got to close the gap. So if you're not good at something, you've got to close the gap. I had a leader, and I think I told this story a couple hundred episodes back. So if you've heard it, consider this strategic repetition. I had a leader tell me that he was going crazy with his team. They were just driving him insane. And I asked him, what was the issue? And they weren't actually controlling part of the P&L that they were supposed to be responsible for. They're supposed to manage the profit and loss statement. And there was one section, and it was just out of line. It was out of whack. It was the worst in this particular region. And this leader was just going bonkers. And he said, I challenged them. I encouraged them. I incented them. He said, and I've threatened them, and they're not getting better. And I said, well, do they know how to do what you've asked them to do? And he literally said, I think I missed that part. So it's great to acknowledge a problem, but you can't just encourage and challenge and threaten and incentivize. You actually have to be sure people have the skill set, right? We set this whole episode up under the banner of we're going to upskill. We're going to close skill gaps. And so once you've picked whatever you're going to work on, you got to say, how are we going to close that gap? And there's probably some training. There's probably some instruction. But even then, you've got options. I know leaders that have brought in outside experts, and sometimes those are consultants. I know leaders who've brought in men and women from a local college who could teach that subject to their team. I had a team one time. We brought in a Disney Imagineer. He was he had retired, but still very talented, very gifted, because we were working on enhancing the creativity of our entire team. So I brought in somebody from the outside. Maybe the leader takes the lead and teaches whatever it is that you're trying to teach. Maybe it's a development opportunity and the leader designates somebody on the team to prepare for and teach the rest of the team whatever it is. I mean, you can let your imagination run wild, but you've got to figure out how to get the knowledge to the team that they need before they can begin to make this skill a part of their day-to-day life.
Yeah. So we got to close the gaps. That's a good one. Okay. So I've heard you say 1,000 times, hope is not a strategy. It made me think years ago when the first time I heard you say that, I'm like, okay, well, so if you don't hope, then what do you do? And I've said probably 1,000 times back, you practice your way to high performance. I've just, every fiber of my being believes, I do believe that hope's great, but it's not a strategy for high performance. I think you're dead on there. But I think practice is. It is, practice brings repetition. Think about it, strategic repetition. It just brings performance up. And if we've got these areas that we are struggling in, we're going to have to practice. It's no different really than my wife years ago used to teach piano lessons. She's a good piano player. She used to teach piano lessons to all these kids. And it was amazing. At the beginning of the year, they would start with this, book one or whatever. And they would just practice these same pieces. I mean, I can hear these pieces in my head over and over. I'm listening to another room, these kids practicing in the afternoon after school. They would come and you'd hear this, and it's amazing how after a few weeks they would progress to the next book and the next book, and by the end of the year they're having recitals. Mark, they're playing piano pieces, but it's happened one note, one practice. I don't know what I'm talking about here with music, but I know if you practice over and over at the piano, you actually can make progress. And I think the same thing can happen for a team. If let's say your team knows we're supposed to brainstorm, or it'd probably be good if we brainstorm, but we really don't know how to brainstorm. You can learn how to brainstorm. We actually have some stuff. Maybe we can put a little link to some strategic brainstorming. I think we have a PDF on that, but you can read the PDF. That doesn't really do you any good unless you start practicing in your meetings, brainstorming or problem solving, or pick your place that you want to level up your team. This strategic repetition makes your team better and better until some point you get like, we don't even have to really think about it. This is what we do whenever we face a problem. We run it through our problem solving model and we solve a bunch of problems because of that. We're getting better and better at it every week, if you want to think of it that way. So I think there's huge power here in the idea of practice when it comes to this team development plan.
Yeah. All I'll add to that is you learn to swim in the water. You learn to swim in the water. Good. My son and I were certified as scuba divers several years back. And yes, there is a classroom portion, but you're not certified when you do the classroom portion. That's right. You're not even certified when you get in the pool. You're certified when you go out and you do multiple dives with somebody who can say, yes, you can do this without killing yourself. Right. And so you got to practice. And as with any skill, you're probably not going to be good in the beginning. If you think about the first time you tried to ride a bike, my guess is you fell over, right? anything you've tried to learn that required skill, the practice is part of the process. It's integral to your ultimate success. So you got to be careful, particularly as you think about the group. It's going to feel awkward in most situations. You're going to struggle. You may even fail. That's part of learning the skill.
All right, so let's call this out, because I think that's a good segue here. If I'm going to learn to ride a bike, I'm probably not going to start. In fact, I've got little grandsons. They start with this. It's not even training wheels now. It's just like a little bike. They can stand up and just run with the thing. And then they advance to training wheels. And now I got one grandson. He's riding the cul-de-sac with the, big boy bike kind of thing. And I think so many times as leaders, it's easy for us to progress through the steps, and we know what we're doing, and we've been practicing as a team. But then we invite someone new into our team, Mark, and if we're not careful, they're not quite up to that. They may not even know what we're doing when we start brainstorming. They may not understand, our problem solving. They may not understand our model, and we've been getting better and better at it for a while. Talk about the importance of making sure that we have a plan for our new team members to learn some of the things and to practice some of the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a situation years ago. It's a long time ago, but we had a leader whose team was struggling, and they had a specific behavior they were trying to inculcate. And we talked about it and strategized. And what this leader decided is that there was a skill gap, and he retrained everyone in his organization. I mean, it was a big task, spent a lot of time, spent a lot of money, and he was actually tracking performance of the team. And guess what happened? They got better. And he was so excited. I mean, we had real numbers of real performance in the real world by real people that lasted for several months. And then performance began to decline. And he called me and he said, it didn't work. I said, well, no. It did work because you told me it worked. And he said, well, it worked for a while. And I said, well, what's that mean? And he said, well, you've seen the numbers. He'd been sending me the numbers. He said, and you see the numbers have gone south. And I said, well, why did the numbers go south? And he said, I have no idea. And I said, well, let's try and figure it out. And after a lengthy conversation, we realized he had replaced or added about 20% to his staff, which was a significant number of people. And I said, did those new people get that training that you offered to all the other folks that drove performance? And he went, no, they're new. I said, well, I know they're new, but this training helps drive performance. You need to give that to the new people. And so I think we've got a real opportunity when we onboard folks to set them up for success. And I know we can't give them everything they'll need in the first week or first two, maybe not even in the first month. But I would just encourage you to have a plan. What are those core and critical skills? We're talking about a team here, and maybe you've identified 5 or 6 or 7, like we talked about. Goal setting, problem solving, conflict resolution, meeting management, whatever's on your list, and that you have a plan over time mapped out. How do the new people learn to function at a high level on our team? Well, they've got to have those skills. And if you don't intentionally provide that training, education, and development, it could take them months and months and months to pick that up just by paying attention.
If ever.
Immersion and osmosis, that's a lousy training strategy.
That's good. If you go back to that NFL draft, it was interesting. Some of those quarterbacks that were taken, they were taken by teams that had in the offseason had signed a veteran to come in, and they talked about bridging between where they are right now and where they want to get with this young player, having this veteran to almost train them, to help them, to bring them up to speed. And I love that kind of mindset. I know there's a hesitancy sometimes. I don't want to necessarily train somebody that may take my job. That's not really what we're talking about here. But by the way, if you can train people to take your job, you probably will always have a job. You're going to get a promotion or another opportunity you're developing people. But when we think about the team skills, it's in the team's best interest to make sure that rookies, so to speak, are brought up to speed, and we're helping them. So I think some of we have opportunities here to pay attention and to really help everybody be good at these team behaviors. Two more things I'll say there. One is I think it's so important for us to, if we're listening today, to identify an area that they're weak as a team, focus on that, and go to town on that. And then if there are people who need some training wheels there, again, make sure that you get that right. But I want to give one little area of caution here, Mark. Our team issue might actually be an individual issue. We may have somebody on our team that we're not going to be able to go where we're trying to go with the talent that we have, the people that we have. And so I think sometimes we may have to make a decision and remove someone for our team. And let's just make sure if we have to do that, we call that the right thing. Let's do that in the right way. These are some of the hard decisions that leaders face. I'm sure you've seen that before.
Sure. Yeah. I even had one leader, a global leader, who told me that those were the hardest decisions he had ever made in his career, is when somebody on the team couldn't go where the team needed to go, couldn't take them there. They may have led to a certain level, but you could argue that level demonstrates their level of competency. In his case, he had tried to train, educate, and develop, but most humans have a lid. And he didn't want that to become the lid on his organization. So as he had to make those decisions several times throughout his career, whether they were bad people, it was not that they were incompetent in role, it's they were capped. And they had, in essence, capped their department or their team, or in some cases, they capped the organization. So once you figure out where you're trying to go, you've got to be sure you've got a team that can help you get there.
I think it's important for us to, if that individual has to be removed, we're still thinking about them. They may be a great fit somewhere else. And so we're still committed to helping them get where they need to be, which might release the potential in another area of the organization. So there's a chance they need to move on and go somewhere else, but they may go somewhere else within the organization. So a lot to think about there for sure. But it's important for us to remind people that sometimes, individuals may not be able to go where we're going. And in that case, it's our responsibility to make sure that we're doing the right thing, doing it in the right way though. Okay. So, the bottom line here is if there are gaps, we got to close those gaps, maybe individual gaps, maybe skill gaps. Again, I would encourage anybody listening to identify how much now are you utilizing the individual development plan. If not, create that plan. Go back through that little list that we gave you today. And I would encourage you to make sure that every single person has an individual development plan so that those skills can be improving and we can be upskilling, as we said. And then if your team, same thing, if you've got areas where your team needs to get better, focus on the first one, attack that, practice. Once you get progress, under your belt, pick another area and just let's continue to make our teams better, because great teams really, they grow stuff, they build stuff, they build great organizations. And I think if we're going to be honest today, all of us listening, we have gaps individually and we have gaps in our teams, and there's plenty to do here to work on if we're going to chase, really what we're capable of. Any final thought there, Mark, today?
I just think it's one of the neatest things that we can do as leaders, that we have the opportunity to do, is to help teams and individuals grow far beyond their wildest dream. As I look back on my career, some of the highlights have been those people and teams that went places they never thought they could go. And they're probably not going to get there without you. So lean in and help people close those gaps.
We'll leave it there. Thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing with your friends and family. Hope you'll continue to do so. And remember, the best leaders lead every day.